And we're back. Welcome to the Voices of Montana. I'm Dave Rye. Our guest this morning, Erik Iverson, the chairman of the Montana Republican Party. And in case you'd like to talk with us, and by the way, I'm waiving the normal once-a-week rule this time around. So if a couple of the House liberals want to call and argue with us, I'd love to have you, actually. Robert in Columbia Falls or Ken in Great Falls or anybody else who fits that description. Our number is 866-627-5483. And, of course, you're welcome to call and agree as well, as in case that's your penchant. Good morning, Erik. Nice to have you here this morning.
Good morning.
How did such a young man as you become chairman of the state Republican Party? I mean, you don't. I'm looking at you and guessing your age to be 30.
Well, I'll take it.
Close?
34.
34, okay.
Yeah.
Remember back when you were 14 and you resented being mistaken for 10?
Yeah, I think I was the one that was young enough and naive enough to run for the position, so that maybe that's what it was.
Been interested in politics all your life because your dad was a state legislator?
Yeah, I grew up around it. I think I knocked on my first door when I was about 4 years old with my dad going door to door in his district up in the Whitlash area.
That's around Shelby.
Yeah, you got it, north of Shelby.
Not
a lot of people know you can go north of Shelby, but you can.
You can't without being in Canada.
Right. Yeah, well, our farm's about a mile from the border. I look out my bedroom window and see Canada. So.
Okay, so right, when did you decide you wanted to be state Republican chairman and why?
Well, I after the 2006 election, I went in the last 7 weeks to work for Conrad Burns and take over his campaign, and it was a tough loss there. Republicans lost control of the House and the Senate nationally, and it was a down time in the Montana Republican Party, and I just felt like maybe it was a time to offer a fresh perspective. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to get somebody younger in there, and the other part of it was I didn't really see anybody else stepping up. And I talked it over with some folks that I respect their opinion a lot, guys like Denny Rehberg and John Mercer and Rick Hill, and made the decision that I'd go ahead and run and see what happened. And so I've been at this since June of 2007, and I think we have made some progress. I think we've modernized our party. When I took over in June of 2007, we hadn't updated our website since 1999.
Wow.
Yeah, we didn't have functioning computers.
Rare to have a website in 1999.
Yeah. And so one of the things we really wanted to do was modernize the party, not only in method, meaning our web presence and more of a professional staffing atmosphere and all of that, but also our message. To talk about, I think, some of the things that younger voters care about. And the demographics in Montana, particularly in the West, are changing. And the types of Republicans that are moving into this state are different than types of Republicans that were around when my dad was going door to door.
Elaborate on that, if you would. What types of new kinds of Republicans are we
I think we're
getting
a lot of Republicans moving into the state that are, frankly, a lot more environmentally aware and conscious than Republicans maybe 30 years ago. Now, I grew up on a ranch. My dad first ran for the state legislature because he was concerned about water quality. I think a lot of Republicans have always been concerned about the environment and treating the land right because we made our living off the land.
Right.
Somewhere along the way in the public's mind, that got lost, that the Republican Party wasn't a party that cared about the environment. And so I think a lot of the newcomers coming in bring an attitude of a lot more open to things like renewable energies and that sort of thing, but they're also fiscal conservatives.
Right.
A lot of them. They want lower taxes, they want less government spending, and I think there's an opportunity for the Montana Republican Party to really resonate with a lot of those folks that are coming in.
Well, environmental activism has been associated almost exclusively with the Democratic Party in the public mind for a long time, possibly because of the efforts of people like Al Gore, but generally Republicans have been reacting negatively to what they regard as environmental extremists or environmentalist wackos.
I think that's right. I think not just Republicans, Montanans in general react negatively when you have an environmental extremist whose sole purpose is to stop development. His sole purpose, even if it's environmentally responsible development, like we've got going on in the energy industry in eastern Montana. I mean, we can do this in a way that doesn't harm the environment. It's not mutually exclusive that you can develop the resources or have a clean environment. We can do both now. In Montana, we have the skilled workforce that can figure out the ways to do the horizontal drilling, to make the clean coal technology, that we can have the syn fuels and all that. So I don't think that it's a choice that we have to choose either or anymore. The technology's there, and I think the Republican Party needs to lead on how can we do it better. How can we develop our resources in an environmentally responsible way?
All right. Let's take our first call this morning. Dorothy calling from Helena. She could have talked to you right in town, but she had to wait till you got to Billings. Good morning, Dorothy. How you doing?
Hi there. I guess when you said horizontal drilling, I that wasn't what I called about. But I think when they're going to horizontal drill, they ought to have to get another permit for the place they're going to horizontal drill too.
Well,
okay. Be able to use one permit to go off in every direction.
Probably right.
Okay, I won't even keep on that. I guess looking at Montana politics and the apportion, when they got into the apportionment thing back in the 60s around the country, and Montana had its constitution so that they could handle the reapportionment thing just nicely under our constitution. But they kept dragging their heels in the state here, and they kept making the House of Representatives more like the Senate because they wouldn't budge when it come to giving more representation to the larger counties. And you were going up to 12,000 people before you give them another representative in the House. And yet we had all these small counties with maybe 1,000 people. And so you had this whole lopsided thing of making the House look like the Senate. And so when they did the reapportionment in the 60s, the Constitution was already set up to be able to give more representation to the larger counties, and they didn't do it. They had to turn the whole thing upside down and end up going outside the counties and combining and all that kind of stuff and made a bigger mess than it was before. So I just wonder if he knows anything about that.
You're going back. I'll ask him, and I appreciate the call, Dorothy. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess let me mention that what she's talking about occurred before you were born.
Right.
But okay, it used to be that,
timely,
as I recall, it used to be that the House was apportioned by population, and the Montana Senate was apportioned one senator per county.
Correct.
So Petroleum, with 800 people, had as many senators as Yellowstone with 100,000. Yeah,
well, that's right. And it's interesting that Dorothy would bring this up now because it's very timely, and I guess I'm frankly surprised how much it's on people's minds. You get into legislative reapportionment and you think people's eyes are going to gloss over. I was at dinner last night with a friend of mine, James Booth, a guy I've known since I was in kindergarten up at a one-room schoolhouse in Whitlash, and we were there to watch a football game last night. He sits down, not very, typically politically involved. He asks me, what are you going to do about these legislative districts?
Were you watching USC get beat?
We were watching USC get hammered by Oregon State.
That shows
Great
that
comeback,
underdogs can win.
You got it. That's right. And it's something that we're working on at the Montana Republican Party. If you look at what happened in the last reapportionment commission, every substantive vote was 3-2. It went on a partisan line, and now we've got these districts with sometimes upwards of 4% deviation. That means somebody voting in Sidney, Montana, their vote is worth less than somebody voting in the city inside the city limits of Butte, because the way the Democrat-controlled commission drew those boundaries. And how we got there is through the Montana Supreme Court. The way this works is Republicans and Democrats get together in the Montana legislature. They appoint 2 members each. Those 4 people are supposed to get together and pick the 5th member of the commission. Well, it very rarely happens. And when they can't agree on a 5th person, then the Montana Supreme Court will select that 5th person. That's under our Constitution. The last 3 times the Montana Supreme Court has been called upon to select that 5th member of the commission, they've chosen someone affiliated with the Montana Democratic Party.
Right. My
point to justices, and I wrote a letter to the Montana Supreme Court justices a week ago, asking each of them, and also the candidates running for Chief Justice, to sign a pledge of openness, impartiality, and fairness.
Right.
Let's make this process open. The public and the press ought to be able to sit in and watch the deliberation as to how they choose this 5th person. Let's watch the interviews. Let's see the questions that they ask. Let's look at the qualities and the resume of these people that are applying for this job, not just their political party affiliation. Number 2, we want them to be fair. And number 3, we want them to be impartial. And the pledge basically says, that as a justice, I pledge that I won't consider the political party affiliation or ideology in selecting that 5th member of the commission, and that I will honor Montana's open meeting laws and allow the public and press as a part of the process. So far, we've had Justice Nelson politely, I will say sarcastically, politely in a 7-point rebuttal to my letter, turn me down, thanks but no thanks. He apparently doesn't believe that he needs to be open, impartial, or fair in this process. And Attorney General McGrath, in a much more, I think, professional, polite letter, said, I'm going to sign the oath of office, and that is my pledge to the people of Montana. So far we've heard back from 2. I've been disappointed. I would hope that the Montana Supreme Court would want to lead on this.
Okay, you know, there are some things you don't want to say out loud on the air in public, and there are things that I can say out loud in public on the air, so I will. The Montana Supreme Court is now and perhaps always will be controlled by liberals. That's because the Trial Lawyers Association, which is a pure Democratic-controlled group, Democratic Party-affiliated group, gives tons of money to generally the more liberal of two candidates who are running for a Supreme Court seat. As might be the case this time. I'm not sure. This time you got a choice of liberal or more liberal, so it's who knows how it's going to turn out. But generally, so you've got basically a bunch of Democrats on the state Supreme Court, you know, and they're supposed to be running nonpartisan, and they show up at Republican occasions, but nobody's fooling anybody. Look, I've got to take a break, and I've got 3 people waiting to. In fact, I've got every line tied up of people wanting to talk to Erik. So we're talking to Erik Iverson, Montana Republican Party chairman. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. You're listening to the Voices of Montana. I'm Dave Rye. The number's 866-627-5. Yeah, the jet has magically brought Erik Iverson back to our studio again, the chairman of the Montana Republican Party. And once again, if Dennis McDonald, the chairman of the Montana Democratic Party, wants time on the show, just ask, and I'll be more than happy to provide it. Line 2, Velma calling from Kalispell. Hi, Velma.
Hi. Erik, you're not going to like what I have to say, but until we have constitutional, ethical, honest government, we're not going to have good government. And if anybody can see that's looked at this cesspool, there's just corruption on every side. None of them are free of it because they condone it. They don't police themselves and kick out the wrongdoers. So they've forgotten what their purpose was when we elected them and sent them to Washington, D.C. And until they clean up this mess, we cannot have government, good government. So the Republican and the Democrat platform should be honesty, ethics, and obey the Constitution above all else. And
well,
until we do that, we're sunk.
Actually, I think I am going to agree with you, Velma. I think you're right. There's no place in public service, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you aren't going to follow the Constitution and you aren't going to conduct yourself in an honest and open manner when you're talking about public policy and whether or not you include the public. So, Velma, I'm with you. And if we've got Republicans that are not abiding by constitutional principles and they have got ethical problems, then they need to either be voted out of office or step down.
Actually, reform is part of the McCain persona.
You got it.
Right?
Absolutely.
Exactly
Absolutely. Yep.
Partly why he picked Palin as VP, beyond the political considerations of having a smart, young, attractive woman.
And a hunter.
Anna Hunter. I forgot about that.
She can field dress a moose.
Yes, I love that remark of Fred Thompson. I think it was the night of her acceptance speech, and he said of the VP and presidential nominees of the 2 major parties, she's the only one of the 4 who can field dress a moose who knows how. Go to line 3, Art calling from Shepherd. Hi, Art.
Hi, Erik.
How are you, Art?
You know, I'm what you'd call a conservationist, and if you called me an environmentalist, I'd probably punch you out. But
not a pacifist, huh?
He's only half your age, Art. He could probably win that one.
Well, that's all right. I at least expressed my opinion in a forceful manner.
Right.
Anyway, I have felt quite often that I'm ignored by the Republican Party. When I called a representative, I either called Dennis Himmelberger or Roy Brown because I didn't
two good
figure
guys
Alan
to call.
Wilson
Okay.
was representing me, and I'd get an answer from Dennis or Roy. I might not like the answer, but I got it. But the Republican Party does not explain to people what's going on. For instance, the Healthy Forest Initiative. We could have, as Denny wants to have, a very profitable cellulosic ethanol facilities here in this state. Not a pilot project, but very profitable ones. We could go in and harvest a lot of these dead wood, and we could have biofuel power plants that the trees are already carbon in the environment, so you're not really introducing any more carbon in the environment, and you can bring up the BTUs with coal. We have a very, very potentially disastrous thing that could happen over in Butte with the Berkeley Pit. It's not a question of if, but when that water will break out, yet there's $1 billion worth of minerals in the water alone that could be gotten out, and you could have the 7 million gallons of water that you need for destination Montana over there, because that's what comes into the Berkeley pit every day, and you probably want to get out 14 million gallons, which would mean that you could do a lot of other things. You have
anyway. Art, you've already brought up enough subjects to take up a whole show. So let him respond. Let him respond as he wishes to those. He may have forgotten what the first one was.
Well,
I'll let it go anyway. Thanks for calling, Art. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
All
Art.
right.
And I think the premise of the question, at least at the beginning, was that Republicans, we're right on policy a whole lot of the time, and it's one of the reasons I'm a Republican, and it's one of the reasons that most of Montanans are Republicans. But unfortunately, a lot of our leaders over the years have not been very good communicators. We've had Ronald Reagan and on the national scene, and that's about it for quite some time.
The great communicator. The only one, right?
We do a horrible job explaining what we're trying to do, explaining our policies to the public, and that has to change. And I think we're getting a lot better at it. He mentioned two great legislative leaders, Dennis Himmelberger, right here from Billings. He's now the Republican leader in the Montana House,
right.
And of course Roy Brown, who's going to be the next governor of the state of Montana. Those are two good Republicans that communicate effectively, but unfortunately they've been few and far between. We're trying to change that in the way we do things and the way we present our ideas.
On the national level, just to talk presidential for a minute. The World War II generation, having gone through the Depression, was a very pragmatic generation. They tended not to be ideological. Ronald Reagan was an exception.
Right.
In that respect, but they also tended not to be very verbal.
Mm-hmm.
They had to work, and they considered fine speech making to be somehow suspicious. And I always think of the elder George Bush talking about the vision thing, because he was criticized for not having vision, so he'd call it the vision thing.
Yeah, and Republicans tend to be just overly polite sometimes too. I look at these debates, and we go around to the different states and debates, and the way some of the people, like last night, there was a lot of booing going on, and I remember the debacle that was down in Hamilton when Conrad Burns and John Tester were debating, and almost a riot almost broke out, where they're become this attitude that you can just be uncivil to people. If you disagree with them, you don't have to be nice to them. You don't have to treat them with respect. And
right.
and I think that's something that as a state we need to work on, both Republicans and Democrats, and do a heck of a lot better job.
There are times you don't want to be as impolite as some liberals, some Democrats. I look at the reaction among feminist groups or liberals in general to the Sarah Palin nomination.
Yeah,
just rude and obstreperous and just plain
it's mean.
Awful.
It's just mean.
Uncivil, mean, awful, terrible. And just disagreeing is one thing, but
that's right. That's right.
Incivility is something else. Go to line one. Jim calling from Powder River. Hi, Jim.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jim.
Hey, Eric. I broke out in the oil field in 1963 up in Fred and George Creek.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
I know right where that
and
is.
Carl very well. They were good men.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you saying that. That's.
I'd like to correct Dorothy. She's talking about horizontal drilling, and I've done a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
They got some idea you're going on to someone else's property. When you horizontal drill, Dorothy, you go down, you stay in your section and quarter, and you get out flat in the formation, and that's the horizontal drilling running in that formation. You're not going into someone else's property or nick section or blah, blah, or stealing from anyone. There's so much misconception going on about drilling and conservation. When we drilled years ago, we really took care of, and you can probably testify this, Eric, of other people's land. There were some bad ones, but very few. We always took real good care of your dad's property, your granddad's property, or anybody else.
Absolutely.
Fay had Fred and George Creek, and I worked on old Fulton's rigs for many years, Cardinal.
Right.
But I just wanted to get that in. I enjoyed being, that was where I started out, and I'm still at it.
Well, it's great.
I'm 60 years old. So.
It's great to hear from you. It's great country up there, too, and you're right, Jim. People not only treated each other right and treated each other's land right, but, they were real leaders and innovators up in the northern part of the state there.
That country has to be a man to live up there in the first place.
You got it. You got it.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate hearing from you.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
A couple of people waiting for us, including one of our more notorious liberal callers, but we've only got a minute till the so-called hard break. I'm going to ask you for a quick answer to what may be a complicated question. Seems like young people were becoming Republicans during the Reagan era. Now young people are, by and large, associating with the Democratic Party. What went wrong in that respect?
Republicans stopped reaching out to them. We go in there and it's like we're speaking a foreign language. We'll go into a college class and we'll talk about tax cuts and less regulation, and a lot of these kids aren't paying tax. You got to talk to people about what they care about. And as Republicans, we haven't done a very good job of that.
Okay, we have. I think they have an image of Republicans, rightly or wrongly, as moss-back reactionary bigots, that kind of thing.
You got it. Old, yeah.
Old,
yep, out of touch. And I think the Republican Party is changing. It's changing here in Montana. You go to the Lincoln Day dinners, which were packed this year, and there were so many new young faces that I hadn't seen before, and a lot of that had to do with Ron Paul, quite frankly. And they did a good job of getting young people involved, and a lot of these young people are very, very fiscally conservative. And as Republicans, if we get back to those roots in our party, we're going to get a lot of young people back.
Yeah, Paul was appealing to them because I think he was, you could say he was socially liberal and socially libertarian.
Sure. That's right.
Basically, whatever.
That's right.
Anyway, hard break coming up, so the computer's going to kick in about, 7 seconds from right now. I'm Dave Rye. These are the Voices of Montana. My guest, Erik Iverson of the Montana Republican Party, and we shall be back in just a couple of minutes.
The Voices of Montana will continue right after this.